Okay, everybody, welcome. Looks like we're live. So this is the Web Server Frameworks team meeting for October 15th. We have an agenda which doesn't have much on it, but we have a new item which we haven't discussed
everybody,
yet.
welcome.
Oh, sorry, I got
Looks like we're live. So this is,
there we go. So what we're going to start with, does anybody have any announcements before we get underway? Nope. Okay. So we're going to start with issue number 71 on the agenda, which is the URL on incoming requests. So this came up because we had a discussion in Node Core. So I'm just clicking and opening the links for myself, talking about relative URLs and support there. And basically the incoming request URL traditionally has been a string, which is a relative, URL. So no protocol, no host name, none of that. And we were kind of talking about how if they added support for relative URLs, how that would sort of play out in the HTTP APIs. And I brought up that we probably want to consider, moving to using a URL instance, or at least offering an API that gives you a URL instance. But I know Matteo had some negative opinion on that. So he was saying that it's slow. And I don't know if anybody came back with an answer for if we can fix that slowness. I don't see in the issue. So what do people think on this? Do we think that, the proposal that I guess it was Jordan made, which is like keep rec.url as a string, and then have like a separate API for getting a URL instance? Like, what is the general opinion on this?
I thought it was a pretty interesting proposal. Definitely, in line with Node.js's point of being and remaining performant. And then some of the ideas that we threw around was like having both options, where like if someone wanted a performant, like the performant one would be by default, just, it's what's retrieved. But then if you wanted the more verbose one, where like, and you were okay with the performance degradation of like doing that, I believe you use it as a function. So it would only ever be computed when you want it to be computed. And thus it's like an opt into the deep performance version. And then I think there's a little bit of discussion on like the naming of it. So I thought that was actually like a really nice sort of meet in the middle, because I know a lot of people wind up going that path anyways. They're like, if it's not going to be provided by Node, I'm just going to decorate it and do it myself. So like if we could provide that and then just let people opt into it when they want to use it, it'd be pretty useful.
Yeah, my only concern with that is so in Express, and I'm not saying this is a good thing, but it's just so common that we have to bring it up. Express will modify the URL property as you nest routers. And there's a lot of reasons why, when you're doing the middleware style approach, why that's nice, right? Because you can have a router mounted on another router and still check rec.url as a string relative. So now, if we want to keep that approach, which of course we can discuss, like maybe there's better ways, but if we wanted to keep that, we'd have to then patch both rec.url and rec.getURL, or whatever the other naming is. And I feel like that could cause a lot of confusion, could also cause a lot of bugs if, middleware are also doing this, right? Because today, Express does it in the router layer, but we also, there's lots of popular middleware that do the same thing, outside of the framework handling it. So I'm worried that by introducing two APIs, we're going to just make that like way more bug ridden in the community. Whereas if we just move to one new API, then we just have to get everybody to convert, the current way to the, to be built on top of the one new API. Does that concern make sense to other people?
Definitely, if you have many ways to do the same thing, then trying to keep them all up to date is going to be a bigger maintenance headache, right?
Do we see this maintenance being, well, so I think, so I guess this conversation also has gotten a little further than maybe it can before we decide whether or not we can just fix the performance of the URL constructor, right? Like if we could fix the performance of that, Mateo's concerns go away, and we could go to just say rec.url is an instance of URL, and then we don't need to worry about the multiple API problem, right?
But the question is it possible to fix that performance, because aren't there some edge cases that just there are no better ways, or is that sort of like no one has really just attempted it? Or I mean, Robert looked like he posted another package like request target. Would it be used? Like, have we considered integrating at the other solutions? Sort of like, Undici is becoming like a part of the Node project. That could something like request target do that as well?
Yeah, I mean that has some pretty great benchmarks attached to it, and even those benchmarks, I'm imagining could be improved. That it's like doing just a ton of regex checks and stuff, which in the past I've seen those be performance bottlenecks, and also security issues with like RDoS attacks. So if we're going to go that route, I think it's worth exploring. But I'm worried that moves the double implementation, which, well, it makes it we would then have three distinct URL parsing implementations in Node Core, right? We would have the existing URL package, the whatwig URL, and then we would have our own, request URL parser, which to me is like a bit concerning, going forward.
Definitely a no-go on that, I think. Be interesting though, what if we went and contributed to the existing URL parser? Is there a reason why we can't do what request target does inside of URL?
It's a good question. I think we would, any behavior change to those existing APIs is going to probably be just a really difficult thing to make happen. And since the whatwig URL seems to be the generally considered, future, I say generally considered. For most people, I think they think of the whatwig URL as the future. I think people like Mateo, who are ultimately very concerned with performance, probably disagree. But I think we need to find the right balance here, because for most cases, that eking that little bit of performance out of it is not the concern, and URL parsing is probably not the bottleneck for most people, right? Like JSON parsing is infinitely worse on most APIs than the parsing the incoming URL is going to be. So I don't know that like trying to push through a change the existing URL package just for this performance concern is actually going to be worth anybody's time, right?
Is there any way to, if it used new URL, but maybe added options that extended from the original, that were like, it basically said, I need the simpler but faster case. Like, I assume that maybe the performance is because it's trying to handle some cases that if you don't handle those, you can go faster.
Then I think it becomes a user. It turns into it doesn't make our API as accessible, because then new users might hit it and get confused, or might be like, why is this breaking? Why doesn't this work? And we like have to constantly, I think it makes the API complexity too high. But then again,
I was thinking like by default, it would be compatible.
oh, okay. So yeah,
right? Like the default would be just exactly what you'd expect from the standard. But then, instead of having a separate, a separate API that you would use to get the faster ones, try and keep it to the same API so it would address the patching and everything if different layers are doing that, but have some way to basically tweak the behavior by giving more information.
Sort of like just adding a fast option, and you
it might not end up being called fast, but like I'm just imagining that, generally it's a trade-off between completeness and speed. And, you might be able to say, well, I'm willing to not have you cover these cases. Therefore, it can go faster, right?
Okay, here's a proposal similar to that. What if we made the URL something you can inject when you create the server? Similar to how you can pass request and response today in the existing HTTP API. What if you could inject, create URL, and by default, if you don't pass that option, it uses the built-in URL constructor. But if you want to pass it, you can pass in an implementation that will satisfy whatever your performance needs are. So it really following, instead of adding an option to the URL, which is spec'd, and we'd have to go through all this like stuff. Well, then do we have a non-spec compliant API?
Yep.
Instead, we just make our API pluggable for those people who want who care about that.
Yeah, that sounds like a good way to achieve that, the same thing I was trying to get at.
Yeah, I like that too.
Okay, and so I can write this up and go ahead, Owen. I saw that you unmuted.
Yeah, sorry, I was just swallowed my carrot stick real quick. I was looking through one of the threads. I was just curious, just for context, is the slowness of new URL, is it like a casualty of the spec, or is it the spec implemented in Node.js itself that like is the bottleneck, quote unquote, by design, or just in the concrete implementation?
I think it is by design, supporting the wide breadth of URLs that need to be parsable in the browser, which is not the same as the versions that URLs that need to be parsed in Node. So by being spec compliant, well, I say in Node, in specifically this use case, because we don't need to parse host, right? We're parsing just the path part of the HTTP request. Right. So it's by design in that it supports the full range of URLs, whereas what we need is really only the very small subset.
I see. Gotcha. Okay, that helps. Thanks.
Yeah, and I definitely like the pluggable suggestion, because then if the optimization that we've chosen doesn't fit somebody, they have still an easy path to be able to plug in one that does fit for what they want.
Which seems to corroborate what Wes just said, is that different runtimes are going to have, maybe don't need as big of a footprint. So you could provide like a subset of the URL constructor that only has the parts that you need, still be spec compliant so it doesn't break. But, so like you could have, like that seems cool.
So just to play devil's advocate for just a second on this idea, and this probably already exists in other APIs, so this might not be a big deal. But since folks are coupling their middlewares to effectively this, rec.url implementation, in theory, you could have a middleware that relies on the URL being an instance of the whatwig URL, and then the server owner, the app owner, says, oh, no, we want to plug in this faster thing, which might break a middleware implementation. So then the question would become, does the middleware implementation need to support checking the URL before using it to make sure that it is the type that they expect? Because if you just said, well, I want it to be a string, not a URL instance, in theory, you could break a bunch of middleware. But I guess as the app owner, I mean, you could do that today. So maybe that's not actually introducing anything new. It's just making it possible with a documented and quote unquote well-supported API, which today you would be hacking it, right?
Right. I guess with the is it the case that if there were two APIs, one middleware could use one and the other middleware could use the other one?
Right.
Like,
if there were two APIs, that would be sort of the benefit of that route, right?
Right. Because then they both know what they're. Yeah, you basically get the feature set that you expect. I guess things like sockets are probably similar, and I think they have commands where you can basically ask what's supported, right? But that does make things more complicated.
Yeah. I kind of think that if it's up to the app owner to do this is the URL parsing I'm going to use, then it's up to them to make sure that whatever they're relying on supports that. And I actually think that's sort of a fine trade-off.
I mean, how often would you parse? Like, is it a case where it actually makes, some middlewares, okay, you've got two middleware, one that wants to use the fast one and one that wants to use the slow one. Are by forcing them all now to use the slow one, is that actually going to affect performance, or is the fact that the first one's chosen the slow one mean that you're going to parse one slowly and it doesn't really have any effect, or does it basically, pull everybody down to the lowest common denominator kind of thing?
Presumably, you'd never want each one to reparse the URL, right?
Right.
So yeah, I would say that what we're looking at here is, do we want to have one slow parse or no slow parse, right?
Right.
So one middleware needing to do a parse. So say the middleware said, if URL is not an instance of URL, or if rec.url is not an instance of, all caps URL, the whatwig URL, then parse and reassign, which I'm imagining what probably middleware authors would probably think is the right way to do that. Then you're bringing everybody down to the lowest common denominator just by doing that, right? Whereas
you're not really bringing them down. It's just like if it's only going to be done once, you're taking the hit if you need to.
Right.
And I guess that would be the only the advantage of having some sort of flag that says, if I want to, I need a URL parse and I need it to be this strict or something. Then you could, it's a good thing to work through though. Like what are you going to break versus what are you going to, how do you handle those broken cases?
Yeah, I also like one of the comments in here that it's URL.parse is a legacy of the past, before there was a standard. So if we break it, we are breaking it, but we should also be more maybe encouraging more of our users. Obviously whatever we do here is not going to land on next major. This is at least a major or two away. And it would be very reasonable to say, hey, users, we're getting rid of this API, or we're no longer improving this API. Use this instead. And it's when Fastify or Express are updated to node 16 or 17, whenever something like this is theoretically added, it would be up to those server implementations to handle it how they want to handle it. If the server of choice really doesn't want to use this URL object, there's nothing stopping them from doing some sort of polyfill or request target and sort of replacing what exists in Node and using that in their implementation instead. But if the goal here is to unify Node.js projects across the board on using this URL object, say that we target that for the future and can, make the case. And then, just like we're saying here, the performance reasons, we maybe expand on the current URL object or the methods around it and say, like, here is the performant method, here is the more complete method. Do this to get that, do this to get the other one.
So just to time box this a bit, I can write up sort of what we've just discussed here in a comment, and we can maybe just see what everybody else thinks. Does that sound like a good next step?
Yep.
Awesome. Anybody have any closing comments on that?
Sounds good.
Okay, so I think 66 didn't really have anything. I think this maybe we just forgot to remove the agenda label. Well, Guy Guillerme said that he wants to see what James and Matteo think about it. But I guess, does anybody have anything on this for today?
The Undici one. Oh yeah, I brought it up in the past. I think it's worth noting that if this Undici library is going to live separate from Node, like it's not going to be a part of Node Core, but might be shipped in Node Core or something. It would be interesting to see what the TypeScript store is there, on the lines of like, are we going to be putting the Undici types inside of the Node Core types? Or would the Undici types have its own repo? And now we finally would have to have the node types depending on another type definition or something like that. Because if Undici depends on node, but then the types, there might be something circular there. But I think it's a very low issue that we would probably, there's a lot more things to be discussed and determined before we even need to go into that.
Do you have links for prior art on this stuff? Like what other parts of the API are doing, so that we could read up, those of us who are less familiar?
Well, that's what I was actually going to ask, is like, what other parts of Node.js are not a part of Node Core already? Is there any other standalone Node.js pieces that is then sort of included in the Node Core distribution or whatever?
Readable stream, right? I think.
Is it? If that's the case, then I can look into that. I haven't looked into it though. This is just a thought I've had because I know we're talking about this a little bit more and more.
I think that's probably the one that's going to be the closest to what you were describing. There's also like the inspector, which I think at least at one point was like in another repo within the Node Core. I just don't know if we still like include it separately or whether we integrated that in.
I posted this link. I feel like these are them, but most of these are C, right? So I think node inspect.
Yeah, that was the one I was thinking of.
So maybe this CJS module Lexer. So this is a fairly recent edition, I think. This is the one that looks for named exports, right? And I don't see any types. But again, I don't know how many of these are exposed, right, to in the Node API. Like some of them might be, like this is probably used inside of the modules code, not necessarily exposed. I also don't see readable stream. Did that get changed at some point? And I just, because I haven't followed that in a long time.
I almost think like, I could have this totally wrong, but that, I think it's more of a code transfers between the projects as opposed to a direct dependency.
Yeah, that kind of sounds right to me too. So maybe we don't actually have a good prior art for this. What about the HTTP stuff? Because let me look here, because I at least one module, LLHTTP. Yeah, this is. I am pretty confident this is also a TypeScript project, like TypeScript source.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I'm also looking now. I just dove into a little bit of the readable stream stuff, and it looks like readable stream has its own export, its own definitely typed export, and it's using an underscore. What is it? Is it get injected? Yeah, there's an interesting way they do it here. I guess it's because if you were to ever use the readable stream repository, you would no longer be relying on the Node.js stream implementation. But the idea is Node.js depends on readable stream. Oh, interesting.
This would be one maybe we just need to ask around and see who knows the most about, if this has been done before. Because I just don't know enough, to make a comment.
Yep. We can definitely move on. Non-issue right now.
Yeah, certainly the type definitions are managed outside of the Node project for the most part now, right?
Well, I mean, all Node definitions they're all hosted on definitely typed. And there's been some discussion about bringing them into Node. I just realized I'm muted. There has been some prior art there. They're all indefinitely typed. And I know the Electron team has some interesting ways that they've done things. Obviously, the Fastify team, we handwrite them. That's probably not, it's kind of like what Node does now. And it just takes like a really good group of collaborators who just make small incremental updates whenever APIs are changed. Unfortunately, the real story is unless Node is ever written in TypeScript, which will never happen, as far as I know, we will never actually get like perfect type support. And that's just sort of the, it's the same for anything. There's no really great way to solve that problem. So we're just going to take it for what it is. And then the Node types are phenomenal now. So I think we'll just cross the bridge when we come to it, if we do something interesting with Undici that hasn't been done before or whatever, or we need to consult the readable stream group and see what they've done. It's prior art.
So my take on the types are not going to be perfectly accurate unless it's written in TypeScript. I think even then, from what I understand, that's not correct because you still have to be perfectly responsible about your typings when you write it in the source in TypeScript. And not everybody does that, and not all APIs can be. So to be honest, this is something we punt. I think we punt, and we needed to go talk with the TypeScript team, literally at Microsoft, and say, like, look, if you can't come up with a better way for us to be able to do this well, like, then it's on you as the TypeScript, product owners. And we're not going to do a lot of extra work to try to like work around that failure of the design of TypeScript, right? Like if it can't interrupt, then don't call it JavaScript superset of JavaScript. Like it's not until you have a good story there. And I don't think we should be designing APIs with that as like a number one concern.
Definitely agree. Yeah. Yeah, I think exactly right. It's like, you're totally right on a bunch of those facets. I think we should just punt it, and when we have to come up on something more tangible there, we can go into it more. But for now, it's just not something we need to worry about.
Yeah, it's probably not really that much different than the other APIs necessarily. Like if somebody comes along, if they get added and somebody comes along and writes the types for them, then great, right? And that won't be that much different than any of the other APIs.
Yep, that's pretty much the story for how it is now, which is doing well. I use Node TypeScript all the time, and I haven't ever had an issue.
Yeah, and I remember from the discussions that were held, it wasn't, there was nobody like, I didn't get the sense the TypeScript community was like, hey, yeah, it would be great if Node actually got more involved or tried to pull these in. It was kind of like, no, that might introduce a whole set of other problems, right?
Yeah.
So.
Well, anyway, I think we should move on to another topic, because this would be a greater conversation for maybe a different setting.
Yeah, agreed. Anybody have any last comments on this one? Nope. Okay. So lastly, I say lastly because I kind of been grouping these two in my head together. So we got the technical and the organizational plan. I don't think there's been any updates on the organizational plan. Does anybody have any? I mean, I think it's sort of, we're already executing on this, right?
Yeah. You're talking organizational, right?
I said, yeah, I figured we'd just knock that one off because I don't think there's much to talk about.
Yeah, no, I think organizational seems like we're in a really good spot. We are doing what we're doing now. Undici got its own repo. I remember creating something. Did we have HTTP Next? Did that get created?
You had the admin issue. Actually, I don't know if anybody's followed up on that. Let's take a quick look.
Yeah, it's been about a month. Yeah, it looks like Rich approved it, and he says, looking at the list of who we got here, Mateo, James, Michael, or Jarish, should be able to do it. So it seems like whenever we're ready, probably James can create the HTTP Next thing and push some of the whatever code we want it to be there.
Yeah, I don't know how much code we have yet, which is fine though. I don't think until we have some code, I don't think we need to really push on that, because we could even commit the code in the web server frameworks group to start and then like move it over once it's there. So I'm actually thinking maybe we should just remove the agenda label from this for just a bit.
Yep.
Since
like
until we actually have code, it's kind of like what do we need the repo for, and the rest of it, I think there isn't much actionable right now.
I'd also like to sort of move right on into the next one then, which is the technical plan. And I'd love to find out what we can be doing to make progress there. Like, I know the quick work has been going really well, and that James has been doing a lot of it. Is there an effort that we want to make to sort of maybe try and stub out parts of this other people could start working on in parallel? Like almost greedily, like I want to write some code for this stuff, but I sort of don't know what or where or how. So it'd be really cool if we could maybe go down that track of like, how can we get people contributing here in parallel?
Yeah, totally. So the last sort of where we left off from the last major discussion, I'm pretty happy with this API that Robert sort of stubbed out in the issue there. I think we could probably start. So technically, I did this on my, I just have on my machine. I have a HTTP Next repo that I just made and started like hacking really poorly. Like it doesn't actually, none of the code actually runs. It's just like this is what it could look like. I copied and pasted a few things into some GIS just to share, like, what does this look sort of in the right direction people are going. And I said maybe other folks could do the same. And then that's sort of where that left off. If we think that we're ready to start bootstrapping the HTTP Next repo based on this, you all know which code snippet I'm talking about that Robert posted. It's like the maybe third to last or fourth to last comment on the thread on issue number 60.
Yes.
I'll post it just. So it's this like middleware, and again, it's calling it middleware, but like the idea would be, that's just sort of to illustrate the point. The idea would be we have a API like dot handle or something like that, which takes an async function, so any promise returning function. Actually, it would be either a promise returning function or just a normal function probably, and then it would call it with a object. It could be a plain object, but maybe we'll have some classes, which will have like a headers, body, trailers, and then you return a response object, and which has the same sort of properties, header, body, trailers. We could start writing some code for that, and then we could chunk off little bits like the URL conversation and say, okay, now somebody write an API for the URL and how you can pass your own URL constructor. I think we're at a place where that might start to be productive since we've gotten a little bit of consensus.
Yeah, that would be pretty exciting to see it start taking shape. Even if it's based on the old stuff, it would be cool to get a feel for this new API, because it could spark almost a when this new API sort of is created and then and it's sort of bootstrapped on top of the old stuff, it might inspire us to rebuild those underlying pieces, because I feel like everyone sort of right now is might just be sort of waiting or something. I don't know if that's the best way to say it, but I feel like we definitely we need a first step, and if it's building out one of this high level API, that could be pretty exciting.
Yeah,
definitely.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, white space seems to be hard to get things started, right? Once there's something concrete, I think you're right that more people will jump in.
I also love the idea of using async iterators and generators as the basis of this stuff, and really making use of some of those really performant new things that have come out over the last couple of years and have been perfected.
So if we started pushing code examples to the Web Server Frameworks repo, would that be sort of a good first step? We could start doing we could turn this repo into the sort of staging ground before we do whatever's going to land in the HTTP-Next repo.
Totally.
We could, I know typically the teams don't put code, but who cares? It's just our repo. We can do whatever we want with it, right?
Yeah, we don't have to publish.
Yeah, it's whatever makes sense.
If it's just examples, if it's just playground, if it's just a sandbox, that's what these things exist for. And we can even make it a simple policy where it's just one other person needs to approve a PR, just so that we don't have spam, coming into the repo, but or anyone who just has access to this could just, anyone who's a part of the group could push or something. It's not a huge deal if a lot of it's just experimental sandbox work.
So what if we push a okay, so not necessarily push. What if we say, let's start writing some code in here. Structure it however you want. Like, no, don't, like, we won't put any rules on people, but don't, maybe like we could namespace it and like put, you know, like I could put, you know, at, you know, /Wesley Todd, like we could have like / you know, code examples, and then I could make a director into there with my GitHub username, and I could start pushing like the random bits that I wrote thinking, you know, these are examples, because that would then get that code in front of people's eyes. And if we all sort of started doing that, we could then find those similarities where we're like, yeah, this is what we want to be our proposed starting point. And then we could make a new, you know, section in that, you know, again, I called it examples, but maybe we don't want to call it even examples. Maybe we want to call it, you know, HTTP-next or something.
Yeah.
Or maybe packages, because I assume we're going to write more than one package here, would be my guess in the end, right? Like we're going to have some examples of web servers built on top of this. We're going to have at least 2 layers, according to the document that we have in the, I guess that's, is that in issue 60? Oh no, it's in the gist. So we have we should also pull in what's in those gists into the main repo. That would also be a good thing. So Robert also wrote out a sort of table, trying to find the link to it.
Oh yeah, I remember that one.
Which kind of outlines like the layers of the API. So we'll probably have like 2 or 3 different packages at those different layers. I can't find it anymore. Darn. Well, anyway, if we want to start pushing code, and if everybody's comfortable with us pushing code to this repo, you know, I think we could just start, you know, making PRs and see what people think as sort of the next step.
Yeah. I say let's do it. I say you know, this working group in particular doesn't have a huge like our repo isn't like this like very specially crafted thing. Like we have our basic contributing guidelines and we have basic organization. So I see no issue at all creating like as you said, an experiments or packages repo or directory in the repo, and then everyone namespaces. Plus, if you do that, let's say you have a package under your name in there, and I'm reading it and I'm like, oh, I know exactly what I want to, you know, I could improve upon that. I could send a PR to your package, and then you and I can go in and discuss that improvement like it's any other project. And then similarly, like if I have a thing, if Matteo, if Michael, if anyone had anything in the project, everyone could comment, PR, you know, issue, discuss, like all of that really nicely.
Yeah, I'm done with that. So maybe since I said I do have a repo called HTTP Next, I could just copy and paste that in here just to get it started. It's based almost directly on what Robert sort of outlined in the issue here. So, you know, that could be a good start. And then, like you said, I think we just, you know, play it really, really loose. Like, I don't, you know, if people name packages and then we decide that, you know, we want to just move them around or whatever, we can, you know, we can be really fast and loose with it.
Yeah, nothing exactly. We don't have to. We shouldn't worry about muddying anything in here because it would be the perfect place to do it. And then when we finally get consensus on anything, that's when we can start potentially considering a fresh repository where we're really serious about what goes into it and such. But let's just sandbox together first. I think it's a great idea.
Awesome. Okay, so I will also take the action item of I will make an issue outlining what we've just discussed here, just so people can give some feedback. And I will open a PR with the like random bits of code that are sort of in GIS and my random repo right now, just to get that going. And then anybody else can, you know, throw code right in there. We can just merge it. We don't even need to like wait, you know. But,
cool.
Awesome. So does anybody have any last comments on that? I think that's the end of the agenda too. So, if we're done,
I think we're good to sign off.
Yep. Talk to everybody later.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Great work
Bye.
today, everyone. Talk to you
Bye.
later.
Bye.
Bye. All.